We need to talk about Congressman Chuy Garcia. He made a decision this past fall that was incredibly undemocratic, and we are going to see the consequences of that decision this March. So Chuy Garcia decided not to run for re-election in Illinois' 4th Congressional District for a number of personal reasons. But instead of making that decision public and letting people know that there was going to be an open seat, he kept that private while his chief of staff filed for her candidacy and got enough signatures to get on the ballot. He then announces that he's not going to run for re-election, and oh look, his chief of staff is now the only candidate in the Democratic primary. And this is a D+17 seat, so the Democrat in this race is almost certainly going to win the election. So now his chief of staff, Patty Garcia, no relation, is going to win the Democratic primary on March 17th by default. But Patty, I saw that you follow this channel, and I got to level with you. I don't really care about your policy positions. I don't really care about your past accomplishments because you cheated. You cheated the people of Illinois' 4th Congressional District out of the right that they have to choose their own representatives. You also cheated the leaders of Illinois' 4th Congressional District the opportunity to step up and run for office. And now, because they can't run on the Democratic line, they're running as independents in November. And yes, if you do not drop out, which you should, we will be covering the campaigns of those independents and giving them a platform on this channel.
This is why politics in America frequently sucks, because the incentive structure is all about partisanship and politeness and not about honesty and integrity and what's actually best for the voters. Case in point, Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, she's a Democrat from Washington State, from a battleground district. She took to the floor of the House to condemn a fellow Democrat. That's a very unusual thing in this day and age. It perhaps shouldn't be, but it is. She was calling out how Congressman Chuy Garcia announced his retirement at the very last minute in such a way so as to guarantee, basically, that his chief of staff will succeed him in Congress.
Representative Garcia's actions are beneath the dignity of his office and incompatible with the spirit of the Constitution.
Now, what Congressman Garcia did, and we should note that his office says that he is stepping down because of health reasons. He's 69 years old, his wife's health, family obligations having to do with his daughter's death, and that is all perfectly respectable and honorable. But what is not is the way in which he announced his retirement, which is at the very last minute, so only his chief of staff had the time to file the petitions to get on the ballot, which means she will be the only legitimate candidate on the Democratic primary ballot, and it's a Democratic district, D+17, so there's no way that anyone else will, in all practicality, become the next member of Congress. And what Congresswoman Gluesenkamp-Perez was calling out was that deprives the voters of a choice. It deprives other possible candidates of a heads up so they can throw their hats into the ring. And the incentive structure is that Gluesenkamp-Perez has been pilloried by her fellow Democrats, and also the news media is just covering this as if, like, oh, look at this congresswoman doing this thing, and isn't that bizarre? But the truth is, what she's saying is just true. How he did this, how Chuy Garcia did this, deprived the voters of a legitimate contest for the congressional seat. And, you know, quite frankly, that should be rewarded in this day and age. Integrity and honesty and the ability to call out members of your own party, that is sorely needed in politics. But you see, she's basically going to be punished for it with the condemnation of her fellow House Democrats, and news media coverage basically not even acknowledging that what she's saying is true. The voters of Illinois' 4th Congressional District got screwed.
Hello, Truth Verdict's family. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, this is where we break down politics with facts, context, and accountability. Before we begin, full credit to the Stitches video used in this documentary for providing public clip and reaction that help shaping today's discussion. Relax, stay with me, and let's break it down together.
What Chuy Garcia did anointing his successor is completely wrong, and he's only making it worse. Earlier today, his office circulated a memo saying that he did not circulate petitions to get signed, when it turns out he absolutely did. In fact, he was the first person to sign. And on this first sheet here, you can see that there's roughly 6 or 7 people in Chicago politics, Chuy Garcia allies, that signed as well. This undermines his claim that there were no backroom deals or anointing of his successor, when it's starting to look more and more like it was. Congresswoman Perez was absolutely right to call him out for it. And I just wish that more Democrats could have stood up in the moment and said, hey, what you did was wrong. It was up to your voters, and you took that choice out of their hands. That simple.
So yesterday, Congressman Chuy Garcia announced that he is not running for re-election. That surprised a lot of people because last Monday he filed to run for re-election. Now there's a 1-week period where candidates can file each cycle to run for office. That's where they submit their signatures. Now he announced yesterday, on the last day of the filing period, saying that he was not going to run for re-election. And then in the last hour of the filing period, who filed? His chief of staff, which means his chief of staff is going to be the next member of Congress for Illinois' 4th Congressional District because there are no other candidates in the Democratic primary. The district is so heavily blue that the Republican candidate doesn't have a chance of winning. And Chuy Garcia was a progressive who's supposed to be about government reform and transparency. If we want to win elections and majorities to stop Trump, we have to stop doing stuff like this and we have to call it out. I would hope every single Democrat in office right now would call out Chuy Garcia for denying the people of Illinois' 4th Congressional District a free, competitive, and open primary election.
Patty Garcia, who is the chief of staff for Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia, does not seem concerned about the optics of the last-minute way that she became a candidate. Critics call it akin to an anointment, but Patty Garcia has plenty of supporters who believe she is the best person for the job. Patty Garcia was greeted by a highly orchestrated group of enthusiastic supporters at her uncle's grocery store in Cicero to formally kick off her campaign for the 4th Congressional District seat.
So for the people out there that are saying, well, who is she? Patty's a fighter. She's a visionary. She is somebody that walks the walk and talks the talk and does the work.
But it is how Garcia worked her filing for office that is now facing scrutiny. She did so at the very last minute on November 3rd, the final day to file petitions. Within hours, word spread that her boss, Jesus Chuy Garcia, was not going to run for re-election, citing his own and his wife's health concerns.
Look, it's an open process. Any person who's interested in running for office can apply, can circulate their petitions and submit an application. We followed the rules, we collected signatures, and we submitted an application.
Since no one else had previously filed petitions to challenge Congressman Garcia, it ensures his chief of staff a primary win and, in a deep blue district, a likely win next November. Critics like Alderman Byron Siccho Lopez, who is considering running as an independent, says it looks like a coordinated plan for Congressman Garcia to handpick his successor.
The congressman himself received the anointment of former Congressman Luis Gutierrez, and now he does the same thing once again. And again, these anointments are not good for our democracy.
Patty Garcia denies it was pre-planned.
Look, it was a whirlwind that last week before filing. The final decision was essentially between that Thursday night and Friday morning. So we literally had less than 2 days to collect everything and get on the ballot.
Garcia with this promise to voters.
Know that I will do everything in my power to be able to connect with voters and earn their trust, re-earn their trust for anyone who may be doubting it.
Supporters repeatedly noted that Patty Garcia holds a Ph.D. and has served first as Congressman Garcia's district director, then become a chief of staff in 2023. They contend she is well qualified for the job.
Where did the signatures come from? That is a great question. So in a previous video, I talked about the new front and the battle taking up between progressives and moderates. And Chuy Garcia, a highly respected member of Congress from Chicago, filed to run for re-election, withdrew his nominating petitions, withdrawing from the race without telling anyone right before the filing deadline, and then helped his chief of staff get on the ballot right at the 5 p.m. deadline so that nobody else would be able to file and be basically in this primary to succeed him. This nominating petition came out in reporting once it became clear that this was going to be like a pretty big story and a fight between Democrats. Representative Garcia, had initially claimed that he had nothing to do with it. He wasn't the one collecting signatures. And then this came out. And as you can see, he's the very first signature on this woman's nominating petitions. This was very clearly a maneuver from Congressman Garcia and his political machine to quietly collect signatures for his hand-picked successor. After Chuy Garcia, the rest of the people on these lists are other local Chicago electeds, folks who are part of Chuy's machine. And I've gotten a lot of comments about how this is just the typical Chicago machine politics, like it's not unexpected. I don't think it's surprising at all. I think that it's surprising that certain members of Congress and certain caucuses are so taken aback by the criticism of this type of political maneuvering. As for whether or not, Congresswoman Glucin-Camp-Perez has a sort of goodwill in the party to be the one to file this resolution, I think it's interesting, but I do, she might not be well known or have great standing amongst the base in the party. But what I will say, when it comes to committees and these sorts of outside groups and the parties that have to spend millions of dollars on races like hers in order to keep them, she and Representative Jared Golden represent districts that voted by Trump significantly. So whether or not she has pull with the grassroots of the party, that's tough to confirm or deny. I think people probably have their own opinions about that. But I will say that the people in charge of making big decisions about the party, about where we will spend money, how we're going to support these candidates and make sure that they are winning these elections, they listen to members like Marie Glucin-Camp-Perez very closely. And they are very apt to take her lead, folks like Jared Golden's lead, even though, he's retiring, because they are sort of these what's called majority maker members of Congress who represent these very, very red seats, who without them, our minority would be even bigger. And, these types of votes that we've had, like whether it comes to the Epstein files or things like that, wouldn't be able to do that if there were Republicans in their seats instead. So this is going to continue to be an interesting argument. I don't think that we've seen the last of this sort of disagreement between Democrats. I did see some recent news that there is a Democrat who is from Chicago, well known in Democratic circles in DC from her work in the Biden administration, who is considering running as an independent, which will be very interesting to watch in a race like this. So I'm going to stay tuned. I like chatting with you guys about this, though, because this is going to be an interesting fight, and I'm interested to see how this goes.
The announcement that shook millions. Recently, Congressman Garcia made a sudden announcement he will be retiring from Congress. His reason, health concern, both his own and his wife, and the heartbreaking loss of his daughter. On human level, many sympathize with that pain. Family come first, health come first, and grief is something no public office can shield anyone from. But in politics, time is everything. And that's where controversy begins. Garcia's retirement was announced at the very last minute, just before ballot filing deadlines. Critics argue that this move effectively ensured that his chief of staff will be the only viable candidate able to file the necessary petition in time to appear on Democrat primary ballots. If true, this means no competitive Democrat primary, no alternative candidate with sufficient time to organize, no opening contest for voters to evaluate multiple options. Instead, one candidate, the insider candidate, positioned as the only legit name on the ballot, that has sparked serious debate. Supporters may argue this is a tragic continuity, a trusted chief of staff stepping in, stability, experience, a smooth transition. But critics are asking tougher questions. Is this politeness? Is this honesty? Is this integrity? Or is it a political gatekeeping? Because democracy depends on competition, voters deserve choice, not pre-arranged outcome. When a primary election becomes effectively uncontested due to timing maneuvering, many argue that it undermines the very principle of open democratic participation. Some Democrats argue that winning majority is critical to counter figure like Donald Trump and protect national priority, but critics counter with this. If democracy is being defended nationally, shouldn't it also be protected locally? If God is to preserve democracy norms, then shouldn't this norm apply within party primary as well? That is why some are calling on every Democrat in office to publicly address the issue and clarify whether this reflects party values or contradict them. This isn't just about one congressman stepping down. It's about the fair access to the ballot, transparency in political transition, respect for voters' choice, whether insider control outcome before voters even step into the booth. Illinois voters in 4th District deserve clarity. Was this an unavoidable earth-driven decision or a calculated political maneuvering? That is the question now echoing through political circle. Now, I want to ask you, True Verdict family, do you believe last-minute retirement that limit competition are tragic politics? Or do they undermine democracy? Should party leader call this out publicly? Or is this just now politics works? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. At True Verdict, we don't attack personality. We examine action. We acknowledge personal hardship. We respect family struggles. But we also ask difficult questions about power and process. If democracy is to remain strong, it must remain transparent. If you find this breakdown informative, don't forget to like this video, comment your thought, turn on the notification bell, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Once again, credit to the Stitches video used in this discussion. This is Truth Verdict, where we follow the facts, question the process, and let people decide. See you in the next one. Bye.